and fence line communities. So we have about 45 minutes or so for this presentation and questions, but I want to stress that this is going to be a high-level overview in terms of sharing information from the report. So as you all likely know, things like freight automation and the freight system in general is nuanced, complicated, so we can't capture everything sufficiently here, but we'll do our best to be as comprehensive as possible. And joining me to help do so are two key partners in the development of the report. We have Jessica Tovar with the Moving Forward Network and Martha Ockensfels-Martinez with Human Impact Partners. And the report wouldn't be what it is without their great contributions. So I'm really glad that the three of us can be here today to present. And with that, I will turn it over to Jessica.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, everyone, and we're really excited to be here, as Joel said. So my name is Jessica Tovar with the Moving Forward Network, based out of Los Angeles, but the network is a national environmental justice network. So why we're here, as Joel mentioned, so RAMP as well as MFN have engaged in the freight or goods movement system and looking at the impacts to workers and to community members. So I just wanted to highlight this slide that has a great quote from Jesse Marquez. He's a community member and he founder of the Coalition for a Safe Environment, mentioning some of those impacts, whether it's increased pollution, the increased noise, premature deaths, all these different impacts, as well as property depreciation, increased blight. So those are some things that are very much happening now. And so we can go to the next slide, Joe. So what we were interested in looking, because we kept hearing a lot of different news about freight being automated, whether it's like a truck that has no driverless truck getting some shipments out. So we wanted to know, given today's freight impacts, will automation help or hurt workers and communities? So with RAMP's guidance and leadership, we were able to apply for a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Pioneering Ideas grant so that we can dive into this question. Next slide. So what we did, we developed some research questions to get to answering that core question. And we try to scope out some issue areas, including traffic safety, air quality, employment, the economy, noise, and vibration. And then when we're looking at freight, it could get really big. So we had to we focused on trucks, trains, warehouses, and ports, because we just wanted to keep it, a decent size. So we conducted research through literature review and stakeholder interviews. We did this not only for California, but at the national level as well. And what we developed was a framework based out of the dangers, threats, and opportunities for each of these sectors, though we won't be able to present it that way today because of the limited time. It is something that we developed within the report, and you can dive in after this presentation. So as Joel mentioned, we develop policy and program recommendations to make sure that health and equity are being promoted. Next. And of course, we had to do this with the support of our Community Advisory Committee. There are frontline community members, environmental justice leaders, workers in the industry, and experts in the fields. So we were really happy to have their guidance throughout this whole process. Next. I think that's you, Joel.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. So just wanted to take a minute to talk about some of the top level findings from the report before we get into some of the specific areas. So essentially, freight automation is here and it's growing, and there's a critical window of opportunity for action. Without interventions, increased freight automation will have significant and largely negative health and equity effects on frontline workers and fence line communities. Freight automation is at an inflection point, and so policymakers, industry stakeholders, frontline workers, fence line communities, public, we can make decisions through programs and policies that promote health and equity. And I really want to underscore that last point. So despite the anticipated negative effects, the impacts of automation are not set in stone, and we can make decisions that protect the health of the people most burdened by freight transportation. So I'm going to take the next couple of minutes to give you a sense of the state of freight automation now. I'll also talk through what the next 5 to 15 years might look like in terms of automation across these different sectors across the nation. So people are certainly still key to making the freight system move. At the same time, technological change is coming. And in some corners of the freight system, it's already here. We're seeing various forms of automation, where some or all human labor is replaced by computerized machines that are already operational or in different stages of development and testing. So generally speaking, the future of automation is, of course, on one level a question of what technologies are possible, right? So what's doable from a technological perspective. But the other factor, as is often the case with these kinds of things, is all about people. And the future of freight automation will also be determined by negotiations and, frankly, disputes between workers and employers. So I'm going to start with trucking. And within the trucking sector, driver assistance technologies for big rig trucks, things like emergency braking and blind spot detection are widely available now. And companies and drivers are also likely to put platooning into widespread use. So this is where technology enables multiple trucks to drive very, very close together, closer than that could be done safely without computer assistance. As for trucks that self-drive, so estimates suggest that they won't be technologically feasible for widespread commercial deployment. Basically in the next 5 to 15 years. And the other issue is that if they become more technologically feasible, they won't be able to travel everywhere. We are likely to see trucks that are focused on freeways and highways, at least during the self-driving portion. From a technological perspective, it's much easier to send a truck down a freeway rather than navigating a complicated city street. There's also some indication that more highly automated trucks will first appear in the Southwest, where the freeways are straighter and the weather is more mild compared to other parts of the nation. So as for the rail and port sector, both are seeing limited amounts of automation now here in the United States. For example, many trains use a form of cruise control to save fuel. As another example, a few terminals at the ports of LA and Long Beach use some automated equipment such as stacking cranes, but automation at our nation's ports right now is pretty limited overall. So then the question, will automation increase in the future? For example, certain railroad companies are raising the idea of using automation to facilitate the reduction of crew members, meaning going from 2 crew members in most cases down to 1. There's also the question of whether ports will increase their use of automated equipment like many of their counterparts already have for quite a few years in Europe and Asia. And the answers to the questions will really become clear through the negotiation table. Negotiations between labor and management within both the rail and port sectors are happening now or will start over the next few years. And really their outcomes will shape the use of automation for years to come. And then when it comes to the warehouse sector, this is a really interesting one in that extensive warehouse automation from a technological perspective is feasible right now. So you have autonomous robots, automated guided vehicles taking the place of humans. In fact, you may have seen some videos of so-called dark warehouses where there are no humans on the floor at all. So the presence of automation, though, is really limited to a smaller portion of early adopters across the sector. Amazon, for example, reports that of its 175 fulfillment centers worldwide, 26 use some level of robots along with people to pick and sort goods. Fully automated warehouses that are run by any business or companies are much more limited in numbers. The question becomes, given that automation is at least technologically, much more feasible in the warehouse setting, why haven't we seen more of it? And why haven't we seen even partial levels of automation in the warehouse sector? And basically, warehouse automation is caught in a tug of war between multiple factors. So on the one hand, you have slim profit margins and really short contracts between the warehouse companies and the suppliers that can make it tough for warehouses to invest in what are expensive technologies. On the other side, you have pretty tight labor markets, and this was particularly the case before COVID, and then rising real estate and rental costs that can make automation more attractive for warehouse owners, since automation tends to cut down on labor costs. So despite these conflicting dynamics, most analyses suggest that increases in warehouse automation over the next 5 to 15 years are more likely than not, although there aren't many precise predictions on the extent of automation. And then just to close this part of the presentation out, in light of the projections that I've just described, there is really a critical window of opportunity for policymakers and industry stakeholders, frontline workers, fence line community members, and the public. First, there's time to better understand the implications of freight automation, and we certainly hope that this report can contribute to that understanding. And then second, we can make decisions, primarily through policies and programs that promote health and equity for frontline workers and fence line communities. So we are going to pull out the key findings across 4 different areas: economic security, health and safety, air quality, noise and vibrations, and traffic. And with that, I'll turn it over to Martha, who's going to kick us off. So I can't hear Martha. Can someone else hear Martha?
I don't hear her either. Do we have her on the panelist?
Oh, go ahead, Allison.
I'm not able to make her a panelist. When you join via web browser, and this is something I just learned today, you can't be promoted to panelist, but I do have her unmuted. There might be some sort of problem with it though.
Martha, are you muted on your end? Can you hear us?
She says she's speaking and she can hear us.
Must be an audio issue on her end.
No worries, Martha. I would try to exit the meeting, and I don't know if when you logged in, if you hit run temporary application, you might want to re-enter the meeting and this time see if it'll let you do it through some sort of attachment. I downloaded and everything.
Allison, is there a direct number she can call?
Yeah, let me see if I can send her an email with a number she can call.
And while you are resolving that technical issue, I can just skip ahead to a section that doesn't involve her, and then we can circle back.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so let's see, we'll jump ahead here. Give me 1 second while I get everything. Okay, there we go. Great. So thanks everyone for your patience as we navigate the technical issues here. So I'll spend a few minutes talking about air quality, and then we'll pause and see if Martha's back on and we can go back. So it's widely understood that air pollution from the freight system is a public health danger and an environmental injustice. Run mostly on diesel. Where there's freight, there's pollution, and it's concentrated in low-income communities and communities of color. Here in California, it's no surprise that 2 of the most polluted regions, Southern California, including the Inland Empire, as well as the Central Valley, have major freight hubs and or freight thoroughfares. So this pollution, whether it's here in California or beyond, has serious health consequences for frontline workers and fence-line communities, a theme that came up repeatedly as we talked with people like Veronica, a resident of San Bernardino, and Robert, a professor of public health who focuses on air quality. And I'll give you all a moment to read their quotes. So what might increasing automation mean for air pollution? So I have three main points that I want to cover. To start, in limited scenarios, automation may slightly reduce pollution through various efficiency gains, but some caution is warranted here. So for example, there's evidence that freight trains using cruise control offers modest fuel savings, which can reduce pollution. And then researchers also estimate that automation technologies like truck platooning could offer fuel savings in the 4 to 15% range when it's in use. Although many of these estimates are from controlled rather than real world studies. So any improvements are helpful for sure, but there are some major caveats, especially with truck platooning, as truck operation changes may negate some or all of the reductions in air pollution. So for example, one concern is that trucks may travel out of the way in order to create a truck platoon, which could undermine some of the fuel savings and pollution reductions. Platooning trucks may also be able to travel faster, which again reduces fuel efficiency. So all of which is to say, automation itself is not a silver bullet when it comes to air pollution. So what is? Adopting zero emission technologies with or without automation would provide much more significant pollution reductions, which in turn would drive health improvements in communities that currently suffer the greatest impacts. So take a freight truck. When it comes to reducing pollution, what's less important is if it's platooning or doesn't have a driver. The key really is whether it has a zero emission engine. So zero emission tech and not automation is the key driving force behind whether pollution will continue to be concentrated in low-income communities and communities of color. So I was going to go on to noise and vibrations next, but let me see if Martha has made an appearance.
I don't believe so. I will send you a chat when I see her.
Okay. Great. So great. So noise and vibrations. So noise and vibrations are certainly a hallmark of the current freight system. When we spoke with Veronica, she not only focused on air quality, but noted the problems of noise and vibration too, including the fact that her dining room would literally shake when trains would pass by. Noise and vibrations aren't just nuisances, they contribute to a variety of health risks, like hearing and concentration loss, sleep disturbance, and cardiovascular diseases. So our research showed that automation in and of itself is likely to have little impact on noise and vibrations. There is one big exception, and that's if freight automation permits freight facilities to run for longer periods, including during more traditional off hours. The burden of noise and vibrations for fence line communities may then increase. Where we're likely to see, sorry, let me move forward here. So where we're likely to see noise and vibration reductions aren't with automation, but again, with zero emission vehicles and equipment. And this kind of equipment has fewer moving parts compared to traditional combustion engines. So it's similar to electric buses, which are quieter than their traditional counterparts. That's the yellow circle there, just to provide that, that analogy. So I'll keep going on to the traffic section. So turning to traffic safety. So one of the people we spoke with is Wendell Mitchell, a truck driver. He talked about how chaotic roadways can be. He said, quote, "Ah, man, stress isn't the word for it. You got a lot of cars on the road now, and a lot of people aren't really thinking about safety. When you don't think about safety, you have accidents." And indeed, there are accidents. So big rigs are involved in thousands of crashes annually, which resulted in 4,000 deaths in 2019. That's a 31% increase since 2009. And 11% of annual roadway fatalities occur in crashes involving large trucks. So Wendell also noted, though, how his new truck makes him feel safer. It has a automatic braking system that kicks in when the truck senses a car slowing down quickly in front of it. And such technologies can react far faster than humans can. So Wendell's not alone in his appreciation for this technology. There was one study that concluded that more than 2 out of 5 crashes involving trucks rear-ending other vehicles could be avoided with technologies like automatic emergency braking. And then in other contexts too, the research indicates that there are a lot of safety benefits for technology that complements or augments driver behavior. This is true for trains, where technologies like positive train control dictate train speed in coordination with driver directions. Such technologies will hopefully cut down on the approximately 5,000 annual collisions involving Class 1 trains. So where the safety implications are less certain and more worrisome relate to where automation replaces most or all driver behavior. So as an example, let's take a truck traveling down the road without a driver. You may have seen a breathless media report or two about a successful run. For example, several years ago, there was a truck that traveled over 100 miles in Colorado to deliver a trailer filled with beer. It did it without a driver, which is of course impressive from a technological perspective. At the same time, it did it in good weather with a police escort on a route that had been run multiple times with human intervention to essentially train the truck's computer. So I think it's an entirely different thing for a driverless truck to run on its own through high levels of traffic, through road construction and hazardous road conditions, and on roads that it's not familiar with. So for trains, similarly, there's no consensus on the safety impacts of using automation to reduce train crew size. Several years ago, the Federal Railroad Administration studied this issue, including reviewing collision-related data, and it noted data limitations made it impossible to compare the relative safety of one-person crews to two-person crews. So it's certainly an area that needs a lot more research. Let me pause there and hope that my colleagues are back online. I think Jessica had a tech problem too.
We're both back.
Oh, excellent. Okay, good. Welcome back. So Martha, I'll go back to the economic piece and let you take it over.
Cool. Thanks, Jill. Sorry about all that, folks. Having some tech fun times as we're talking about automation tech issues. So the section I'm presenting on economic security, health, and safety. Also, my name is Martha, and I work at Human Impact Partners. And this section is a lot of like how we view our work, which is our health, the health of populations, is super impacted by economic security. And so we wanted to like focus in on that in this report to see like what is automation going to do. As Jules mentioned, there's going to be impacts to the workforce, which impacts people's health, both physical and mental health. And what we found is, this is also the caveat, which is without the intervention, which we'll get to soon. But automation already has and will continue to cut jobs for some frontline workers. And with the shift in how work, like the new way work will be, will also cut wages and benefits, or they may also decline. And we also found through some of our key informant interviews, that it's already impacting local economies. So say an entire terminal at a port goes automated, which it has in different places, that impacts, what the local economy looks like there, like who's eating at the restaurants, who's ordering pizza, and those local restaurants, if they don't have the workers to cater to, that impacts, the ripple effects go out. And that could be happening on a wide range of, like across the country, depending on how automation rolls out. And then, as maybe some of you have seen in news reports, automation has and will likely continue to negatively impact frontline worker safety. For for example, at Amazon warehouses that have a lot of automation, that have a lot of robotic entities doing the work, they're way higher injuries, double what other non-robotic Amazon warehouses have, I believe was the last number count. And that is already way higher, I think almost double what the national average is. So it's impacting people's bodies, physical safety. And as we know, who's in these jobs in a lot of these industries, especially I'll speak to, since we're talking about warehousing, I'll keep going that thread, like majority of workers are workers of color, coming from communities where a lot of the jobs available are lower wage jobs. So that's having a whole, it's a whole equity impact of like who this is impacting. Thanks, Joel.
Sure thing. Great. So with that, I think we'll turn it then. We'll move from the findings for the report now into some of the policy and program recommendations that we developed. Jessica, over to you.
Thank you, Joel. So again, we wanted to put people first, and it was really important for us to have these policy and program recommendations. One of the things that was highlighted a lot during our interviews with our key stakeholders in our community advisory committee was engaging frontline workers and fence line communities in automation decisions is really important. And then supporting frontline workers as well as frontline workers and fence line communities. Next slide. So engaging frontline workers and fence line communities, what does it look like? So one of the things that was mentioned a lot was meaningful engagement, not just the notice, but taking into account barriers to participation, including language access to the information, limited ability to participate during work hours, childcare, all these different things that people have to contend with. And then for business leaders, it's important to engage the workers when thinking through automated related decisions, because they're the ones on the ground knowing maybe how to even make things more efficient and how it will impact them and their work. Next slide. And so I'll pass it over to Martha.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so in that thread, we have a few recommendations for supporting workers. And starting us off, we want to recommend that automation be done with the intent of supporting the health and safety of workers, and that overall around worker policy, strengthen workers' right to unionize for fair wages and benefits, and to also make sure there's worker voice when it comes to automated related decisions in their workplace. We recommend the enforcement and improvement of workplace safety standards for worker health and safety. And we also recommend correcting worker status misclassification of truck drivers. So one thing we learned is depending on like some drivers have a lot of support, maybe unionized, and then other subsets of drivers are tend to be gig workers and are doing the recommendation is that they be reclassified or classified as workers, as staff, so that they have access to benefit and not as gig workers. And we also recommend for things will shift, and we want to make sure that there's a robust safety net for workers that are displaced in the process of automation shifting worker needs. And so we recommend expanding programs like displaced worker programs, worker retraining programs. And then the last one is very broad, but to implement widespread policies to address automation's impact on the U.S. economy so that it doesn't have a negative impact, and that hopefully is done with a positive, in a positive way. Okay, and then the next one, thanks for the next slide. And then going back to supporting both frontline workers and fence-line communities, we recommend having automation impact reports, similar to like how environmental impact reports and how we do health impact reports, to really understand when automated technology is being implemented in industries or in specific areas, that we understand what the impacts will be before folks go forward with it. We also recommend prohibiting the use of public funding for freight projects that might have a negative effect on worker health and safety. You know, we heard in our interviews that, you know, back in the day, you know, certain municipalities, I mean, many municipalities would give like huge tax breaks for employers looking to build in their community, because it usually meant jobs. And that might shift as automation, if automation takes over, and then it's the net benefit to the community is really, like, the dynamics are really changing. So that was one recommendation we heard in our interviews. And we also recommend accelerating efforts to get to zero emission system through incentives, regulations, and permitting decisions, as well as implementing federal policies to prioritize the safety of freight drivers and other road users. And I think we're going back to Joel.
I think so. Yeah. Great. And then in the course of our research, of course, there's always other questions that come up, right? That still need to be answered. And so as the conversation around automation and its impacts on health and equity continues, we need to keep gathering additional information. So here are some select examples of some of the areas where it would be useful to have more research and more information. Things like, you know, what percentage of any displaced freight workers will be able to transition to new positions that might be created by automation? And then how will platooning trucks and passenger vehicles interact? So if you have a relatively long line of trucks that are traveling pretty close together, and a car needs to, you know, change lanes, does that increase the odds of collisions? Excuse me. And then lastly, how would the reduction in train crew size affect traffic safety in a variety of real world conditions? So just to give you a flavor of some of the things that we still need to do. And with that, I think I'll turn it to Jessica, who will wrap things up.
So thank you for the time, everyone. We really hope that you could share this report with your networks and use it for any automated related proposals or policy making to inform those decisions. Yeah, so please share widely. Next slide. And then wanted to see if you had any questions, but if you don't have any questions, we also wanted to engage in a little bit of a closing discussion by asking, what is one finding that you found compelling? How will this report be useful for your work? And who else should hear about this report? So Allison, I'm not sure if we're able to engage
There were a
folks.
few questions
There's one-
in the, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I saw, is it Cara or Kara has a question about injury rates being higher in warehouses automation. I just want to like put a note that specific statistic is specific to Amazon warehouses with automation. And I think that's a great question. I'm just going to put like one of the theories based on the research is the way they do the pace of work in Amazon warehouses, and combined with these giant robotic entities is kind of makes for disaster. But that's a great question, and but I wanted to make sure it's specific to Amazon warehouses.
And there's one other question just a little higher up in the Q&A. It looks like while Joel, you were talking about platooning, the question is from Carrie Cartwright asking, did you obtain information on the Caltrans US DOT truck platooning demo from 4 to 5 years ago?
So I'm going to hazard a semi-confident guess and say yes. Platooning, there was actually a fair amount of research around platooning. So it was one of the areas where just the research was a bit more rich. And there were quite a few studies that we looked at, and I would guess that that study was in there, but I would need to go back and look specifically at the sources to be sure. Thank you for flagging that. I'll definitely circle back and see.
Sounds good. Allison, are you seeing any hands or additional questions?
I'm not. If you cannot find the raise hand button and you would like to speak, just put a note in the chat and I will unmute you.
You see a long chat message from Rob Ball. Maybe I can just read it if Bob is not able to unmute. The study seems to focus on conversion of warehousing rather than the effects of new automated warehouses. Did you look at the benefit of higher paying jobs in disadvantaged communities created by new automated warehouses? Aren't there economic benefits to automation to workers over manual laborers in normal warehouse operations?
Martha, do you want to respond first?
I just want to soak in the question. Took me a second to find it in the chat box. Does the study look at the benefit of higher paying jobs? So I am curious, maybe you know, like if the studies we looked at were some based in the now and also some projecting out. And so did the study look at the benefit of higher paying jobs in disadvantaged communities created by new automated warehouses? That hypothetical I'm not familiar with. So I don't know a ton of like what, or maybe if, what do you mean by new automated warehouses maybe? So
I don't know if there's a way to unmute Rob and let him explain his question.
Or I'll just, to the last part, I mean, higher paying jobs, you can check this, that's just the old one. So I'll speak to, I know for Amazon, I don't know if they create their warehouse, it's really hard to get specific statistics on exactly how many Amazon warehouses are automated. So I'll speak to like that area because I've worked on that in a few different projects or have automation technology. And yeah, to the question of whether like they built those from the ground up with the robots in mind or if they retrofitted them in, that I don't know. In the case, yeah, that's a great question that I don't know. Joel?
I would just add that I think, the question around, so I think there's the question of whether there will be higher paying jobs created by new automated warehouses, and then who will be able to get those jobs, right? And so, will people from disadvantaged communities have access to those jobs or be able to get them based on their qualifications or educational experience? And then, I think there's the question of, for people who are working in warehouses now, right? Like if you have a warehouse worker in a non-automated warehouse and, a brand new warehouse that's highly automated is built next door, will that worker be able to get any jobs that are associated with it? I think that's a big question mark. And I think in many cases that without, some of the policy and program recommendations that we are recommending, the answer is going to be no, right? So, it's one thing, I think, like there was an example of that was provided where you might have like a forklift driver, with support being able to essentially transition to, some sort of mechanic position for an automated forklift, right? But that likely isn't going to happen without, providing, again, some supports through policies and programs. Appreciate your question, Rob. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that, Joel. Thanks for like regrounding us in this idea that what's actually been happening versus what could happen, which is one of the recommendations of the report, which is that automation could be focusing on making workers' lives easier and safer. And as of right now, a lot of the technology seems to be implemented to make to focus on the bottom line of the company and at the expense of workers' bodies. And so I think, yeah, maybe that's why I was like a little bit stuck in the question of the current situation we have hasn't, maybe there's some beautiful new facilities that we're unaware of, but it doesn't seem like that is, at least right now, the case of companies that are like building with the full intent of protecting worker safety and workers' bodies. And that's what we'd like to see.
Really appreciate your guys' comment, and the study is fascinating. This is Rob from Kern. In the San Joaquin Valley, we don't have a lot of existing warehousing, and a lot of the new warehousing that is looking to come to the San Joaquin Valley is automated or being developed to be automated. And so there's local job training programs through the community college systems and that are looking at ways to provide the education necessary for these higher paying automated warehousing jobs. The $15 an hour entry level jobs at Amazon are maybe a step up from being a field laborer. But you know, you get to work indoors in an air-conditioned environment year round. But but taking them to the next step, that's still not enough to be able to have a subsistence housing. And so focusing more on as an economic development aspect for rural areas that is something that we really need to be looking at. How can we train a workforce to be ready for higher paying jobs, and not just warehousing and automated warehousing, but manufacturing. And as manufacturing comes back to our shores, we really need to be looking and focusing on how we can bring manufacturing and benefit that manufacturing with automation, and make sure that we have the workforce that's trained for it. And I think once you focus on development of your workforce and really put some resources towards the development of your workforce, then I think you're going to be able to turn that corner to show that the automation is going to benefit those disadvantaged communities that they're showing up in.
Rob, really appreciate that context, and I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think very much in line with our recommendations related to really strengthening job training programs and ensuring essentially like putting them on steroids. I mean, I think in terms of some of the changes that may be coming, they're very much needed. I think one of the things that I'll just add, that is an issue not just within freight, but I think with the economy, with our economy overall, is that these changes, any automation related changes within freight, are happening in this in a context where you have a lot of automation happening in a lot of other sectors. So it's sort of the question of how many jobs will be available, right? So if you've got 100 people, and there's significant job loss because of automation, what's the number of new jobs that will be created? And I know, you all have probably seen like reports, sort of the sky is falling, no one's going to have work because the automation is going to take over everything. And from our research just within freights, like those, kind of crises calls, I think are a little overblown, but there's still going to be a lot of automation across many different sectors. And so there's going to, I think, there's going to be a sort of a supply and demand question when it comes to workers finding jobs. That's, an even bigger challenge.
Yeah, there already is a huge shortage of truck drivers, and so automation should help that. And I don't think you're going to see 100% automation in the trucking industry for some time because of hazardous materials and the rules around shipping of hazardous materials. I think like about 7 to 10% of trucks are shipping hazardous materials out there on the road. So you're always going to need some level of manual. You're not going to be able to automate everything for some time, but I think it's something that also what you're doing is you're growing your region's economy. Particularly if you're not focused on warehousing, but you're focused on manufacturing. And if you can grow the region's economy, you can help lift these disadvantaged communities out of their impoverished state. Instead of giving them $15 an hour jobs, you're giving them wage subsistence jobs that allow them to have households and afford health insurance and really help improve the health of these communities and their states. So.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Rob.
Just a check-in for something. I don't know if others experienced, but we just had an earthquake in Sacramento. So I don't know if others are having experience, but I just wanted to alert people.
Wow.
I don't know if it's major, but I just checked with some others and they just felt it too.
Felt a little shake in the office here in Sacramento. Yeah.
Our policy and program recommendations are so powerful that the policymakers just felt it right there.
You literally shook the ground.
Shook the ground.
Thank you so much, Joel and Jessica and Martha. This was really fascinating, and I agree with Rob. I think your findings are very compelling, all of the findings. So really useful, and we would love to share the report out with the group in our follow-up. Make sure everybody gets a copy, and invite them to follow up with you as well. We'll make sure that your contact info goes out as well. So thank you.
Really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just one if Rob, if there's any, thank you all. And I didn't feel, I'm in Alameda. I didn't feel it, but sending good vibes to all you. I'm a newbie to earthquakes, and I'm not the biggest fan. If somehow if Rob could forward something to the group, I would. If there's information on that, I think it'd be great for us to learn about what training programs there are, because we'd love to lift up stuff that feels and seems to be like good for workers in the community.
We can help make those connections offline. Thank you. All right, well, with that, we're just a few minutes behind our agenda, but that's okay. We had wiggle room. Why don't we take a break until 4 o'clock and come back? That'll be about a 7-minute break. Easier to come back at the top of the hour than 2 minutes before. So see you all in a few minutes.
Frank, if you hit in Giles, if you hit connect to audio, we should be able to. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. We determined that there was some shaking just a little bit south of us, closer to Stockton. So I don't know how many people felt it, but it was a little bit exciting. All right. Well, we are going to turn back to the second half of our agenda. This is a panel discussion about port congestion. We've got Hannah Walter from the CTC, Giles Giovinazzi from CalSTA, and Frank Ramirez from GoBiz here to give this presentation and lead us in discussion. So I'm not sure who I'm turning it over to first. Hannah, going to go first?
Yeah, I'm just gonna give some context and then Frank and Giles are gonna give the main updates. So
Great. All right, thank you. Take it away.
okay, so well, thanks for letting us talk about this. My name is Hannah Walter. I work for the CTC, and there's a state effort underway to support the goods movement industry. And what it is well, there are 3 agencies involved so far. So GoBiz, CalSTA, and CTC. And in one way or another, we've all been working in the freight area for a while, but recently there's been more attention on the issue of congestion at ports and some of the impacts that that's having. And so in a CTC meeting earlier this year, Commissioner Inman and Commissioner Liu asked staff to look at how we could support stakeholders in just beginning to identify some of these issues and finding solutions to them. And so CTC and CalSTA started trying to gather together a lot of the information that we had and organize it and look at what we could maybe start trying to do. And the first thing we did was we identified some challenges, some of the more significant challenges facing the goods movement industry. And I just wanted to share those. Allison, can you move to the next slide? I only have 2 slides, so my update's really brief, but can you change the slide for me?
Is it not changing on your end?
It's not, but it's okay. I can keep talking. I remember what it says. So basically, when there's just a lot more, there's a significant increase in the volume of cargo that's coming in, not just through the ports, but in all areas, and it's putting a lot of strain on the system, and that's having a lot of impacts. So you're seeing schedule delays, you're seeing increased costs like spot rates and demurrage fees. You're seeing export challenges. There are some ag exporters that are finding it hard to export their goods. The warehouses and distribution centers are full. There's a need for more truck drivers, more port workers. There's a challenge that ports have of staying competitive. They have a lot of infrastructure needs. There's different standards in California than in the rest of the country. There are trade wars, higher rail costs sometimes than if the cargo was moving in through another port to Chicago. So those are some of the initial main challenges that we identified. And then we started partnering with GoBiz, who had already started formulating a plan to kind of do some work in this area. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Frank and let him talk about what he's been working on.
Thank you, Hannah. So what we're doing, I assume, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. So thank you. So what we're doing is, as Hannah mentioned, we've been taking a look at congestion issues now for a couple of years, and I'm going to broaden it. And we're not just limiting it to the ports, but we're limiting it to the entire supply chain. And so what we've designed with the blessing of the governor's office, we are putting together a supply chains solutions summit this fall. And we're working in partnership with the Port of Long Beach, the California Transportation Agency, CTC, and other partners. And we're essentially having a three-step process. What we're going to be doing is first of all, we understand that there are severe supply chain challenges, and Hannah alluded to some of them. And what we'd like to do then with our Supply Chain Solution Summit is we're going to start out with a social media campaign running through about July to August, mid-July to mid-August. We're going to be soliciting ideas and perspectives through LinkedIn on the potential problems and possible solutions. We're going to be accessing a wide variety of stakeholders. We're going to be reaching out to community folks, to students, to people out of state, to the people in the industry, to the government sector. So we're going to be reaching out to everyone, looking for what they feel are the problems and some potential solutions. We're going to get a wide variety of feedback, and we'll filter those as we get them. And what we'll be doing then, once we have the social media campaign well underway, we're going to be feeding that information, and we're going to be developing a white paper that will be providing some historical perspective on current challenges by the supply chain. We're going to be looking at trends and solutions. We're going to be providing some geographical perspective by looking at other ports in North America and abroad. We're going to be looking at particularly port challenges, sort of as a broader set of supply chain disruptions via a case study. Then from there, we're going to have a virtual workshop, which will allow participants to discuss problems and solutions, and that will be held roughly early September. And it's going to be organized around a set of possible challenges. We're going to prioritize them and identify solutions and responses to these challenges. We're going to be utilizing a combination of presentations, including rotating small table discussions and breakouts. So that'll be in a virtual workshop setting. And then next, what we'll be doing is all that will feed into a 1.5-day in-person summit at the Port of Long Beach. And that will be on the 21st of September. And basically it'll be an invite only. We will have gathered a broad ideas of congestion issues and solutions, and all that will feed into this half-day summit at the Port of Long Beach. And we will be doing a invitation only, about 35, 40 folks to sit at the table and shift through the ideas and come up with other ideas during the half-day summit. And the idea then is to have a call for action, which at the end of the summit, we're going to have, we're going to identify some of the key findings and next steps and timeframes for implementing some of the solutions that we found. And then ultimately, we'll have a final report that is going to be outlining all the key findings identified in the call to action. Just for your information, again, the project sponsors are the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, the Port of Long Beach, California State Transportation Agency. The project lead will be Tom O'Brien, a PhD from California State University of Long Beach. Tom is under contract to develop this entire supply chain summit and the process. We're very excited about it. I know over the last several months and beyond, the governor's office has been receiving numerous phone calls, numerous texts and emails and letters indicating issues with the supply chain. And so the governor wants to be very responsive, and this is one way that we'll be dealing with this issue to begin with. And we're looking forward to having this be propelled into a longer term, year or longer process where we'll be addressing a lot of the issues, hopefully in a meaningful way. That's it for now. Thank you. Giles?
So just to add to that, I just want to say thank you very much to Frank and to GoBiz for kind of allowing CalSCA to join on this project, and also want to thank Hannah and CTC. Again, this issue was raised by Commissioner Liu and Commissioner Inman at the March CTC meeting, and we've been collaborating very closely with CTC, just doing research back and forth, passing notes and making lists of stakeholders and preparing background memos. And so thank you, Hannah, for all the work you've been doing with us. And also want to just thank Eric Frederickson for just giving us a lot of that technical background as we kind of started networking and branching out. A lot of the work that Frank is doing right now with CSU Long Beach and others, including also USC, Dr. Genevieve Giuliano. There were spin-offs, the spin-off of work that was done, sponsored by Caltrans, Sustainable Freight and Planning Division with the Sustainable Freight Action Plan. So I just want to thank everybody for all that support. And yeah, the only thing I have to add is, this is an issue that Secretary Kim has, we've been having monthly meetings with California Association of Port Authorities throughout the pandemic. And, we've been very conscious of disruptions in the supply chain. I'm really starting to get there was a White House task force started on supply chain disruption in recent weeks. Clearly throughout, there's lots of different aspects of this. I mean, there's been a national focus on disruption that have been going on in the San Pedro Bay ports. And clearly it's nationally significant. I mean, 40% of the containerized traffic coming into the country is coming through that gateway. But as Frank mentioned, it's broader than just the ports. They're trickling over into warehousing. There are a number of different workforce issues. I mean, there was a task force that was just announced today, or a roundtable that was just announced today, to look at trucking shortages. That and there have been quote unquote trucking shortages that have kind of been reported or talked about for a long time. But I mean, there's a focused effort to try and address some of the issues that may have been exacerbated by the pandemic. Secretary Kim, made an interesting point at the CTC meeting last month. He's saying that it's kind of a very interesting time to be involved in transportation policy, because we're coming out of this pandemic period where clearly it had an impact on the way we travel and transportation. And it's going to be interesting to see how durable that is. What's here to stay and what's not. For example, teleworking. How is that going to affect transportation? How much are we going to come back from teleworking, and how is that going to affect long-term transportation patterns? But another area, and the one we're focusing on with ports. I mean, obviously, an explosion of imports, consumer imports coming into the country, and an explosion of e-commerce that's gone on through the pandemic. That's really, I think, a lot of people are attributing to kind of the congestion, the congestion coming to the ports of the maritime supply chain. How is that affecting exports? I mean, we've been hearing things. There was a congressional hearing just last month talking about shortages of containers and how that's affecting the agriculture industry. That it's because of the huge influx of imports coming into the country. It's more lucrative just to send empty containers for shipping companies to send empty containers back across the ocean to Asia to get refilled with consumer goods. Is that impacting? How is that impacting? You have a lot of anecdotal stories from agricultural exporters saying that's impacting their ability to export. Clearly, California is the biggest agricultural producer in the country. So we want to make sure we protect that the ability of our agricultural producers to export their goods. Talk about shortages in the agricultural trucking sector. So anyway, these are all, and I'll just say that these are not all issues that the state of California can solve. A lot of these are global issues. I mean, going to consolidation within industries like the shipping industry, or the fact that there are not that many container companies that produce containers domestically, and it's not a very diverse industry. And various things that have been thrown out there that we may or may not be able to solve as a state. So I think the purpose of trying to convene stakeholders is to get a lot of different stakeholders that are involved in different aspects of the supply chain. It's very complicated supply chain, and seeing what they can bring to the table, and what are things, what are solutions that can be implemented to help alleviate the situation. I think one area where Secretary Kim in particular has been trying to show leadership is with outreach to our federal partners. We've met with Federal Maritime Commissioner Carl Bensel. The last 2 weeks, we've met with senior USDOT leadership, Carlos Monnier, who's the Undersecretary of Transportation for Policy, and Lucinda Leslie, who's the acting maritime administrator. And Secretary Kim will be. There's been the USDOT Secretary Buttigieg is putting together a roundtable next Thursday on the 15th to talk about port congestion issues. Secretary Kim will participate in that. And I think the main point he's going to make is just that we're going to be doing this ongoing engagement and using our convening authority, as Frank described, to kind of look into these issues. So I think he's going to want to make stakeholders aware of the fact that we're doing that, and hopefully get senior USDOT or senior federal leadership engaged in our convening activities. So that's what I have right now, and stay tuned. We're very excited by this effort.
Thank you, Giles and Frank and Hannah. I think we will open it up to any questions for the panel. I see Michael Cano said, I have a question. I don't know if we can get him unmuted.
Michael, you should have the ability to unmute yourself now.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Appreciate it. Thank you for that great presentations. And on the port congestion discussion, obviously we're very much trying to work with our partners at the ports and the supply chain over at Metro to see ways that we can invest where needed or support policy where needed, since it's the lifeblood of our county as well as the state. Just a question in terms of linking priorities and investment strategies coming from these kinds of discussions into federal funding opportunities. Obviously we have a terrific TSEP program here that allows us to be able to invest, and we're getting some restrictions lifted in terms of how much we can invest in intermodal and port facility improvements. But in general, it's a little painful to see year after year, infra awards going to other ports around the country. I know the Georgia ports were very proud of their inland port project that they got funding. Several other ports got funding. I don't think our two ports of LA and Long Beach or any California ports really have gotten any funding from infra in the 6 years it's been active. And that's been a point of contention for us in LA County, given that we've had some very strong applications that were funded eventually by TSEP, but not by our federal partners. So making that link to, the importance of that gateway to the nation, but the national funding not coming back in to support infrastructure improvements is something that perhaps the Secretary can help raise with the Secretary Buttigieg in terms of just finding ways, whether it's through that program, whether it's through infrastructure bills, to prioritize and find ways that we can invest to make the goods flow even better for the entire country. So I just wanted to raise that. That's something we've been talking about before. I know Secretary Kim is very aware of that, and urge him to be as tactful as possible, but to raise it, especially if we can find some solutions we agree that will help unlock the congestion issue at the ports.
I would just say 100%. You're absolutely right, and I think I mean, I don't, we'll have a convening and I mean, ultimately we don't control operational issues at the ports, but we'll have a conversation to see about, what can be done to make things more efficient and what stakeholders say. But I think one of the things the state definitely can do is be an advocate for funding. We have a new administration. They're clearly very focused on the West Coast. And I mean, this is without us pushing them to want to look at West Coast ports. I mean, they know that this is an area that they need to be looking at and putting together a supply chain task force. The Biden American Jobs Plan has something like $17 billion in it for ports, but also inland waterways and other things. And I think there's like $6 billion in there for some type of clean port program. But these are things that we have, in the extent we've had conversations already. Hey, we're the state is that we want to partner with you on long-term infrastructure investment. That we have programs like TSIP. There's we're the $250 million for the American Recovery Act was included in the state budget. So we're pointing out ways in which we can partner with them on infrastructure. I think that's going to continue to be part of our message. I think the bipartisan Senate deal had something like $16 billion in there for ports. So clearly, money for ports is something that benefits this state. We're a big port state. So I think that's a message that clearly we're going to want to reinforce the senior federal and congressional leadership.
Yeah, if I may add, Michael, this past budget cycle, the governor gave the ports $250 million to help make up for their losses during the COVID, and so the pandemic has been kind of a mixed blessing for us. Obviously it was a bad thing, but on the other hand, it exposed some of the weaknesses we have in our supply chain, and we're moving quickly as fast as we can to try to shore those up, including lack of funding, but also other areas in terms of how efficiently the goods move and so forth. So that in a sense, the pandemic has given us a boost, and people now realize we've got to do something about this issue. So the governor understands the issues, and he's moving as quickly as he can to bring things forward.
Thank you. I see another question from Andrea, who's also looks like you just popped up as a panelist. So Andrea, I don't know if you want to ask your question directly or if you want me to read it out of the chat.
I can read it. Thank you, Jeannie, so much. It's an honor to be here on behalf of the Native American Liaison Branch and recently joining this work here with Caltrans and all who are here doing this incredible work. So thank you for the opportunity. My question, well, first of all, thank you so much for everybody and what they've done, what they've been doing, and what they're so dedicated to. And my question is specifically to Frank, Mr. Ramirez. You mentioned folks that were going to be invited to this very important meeting, maybe 35 or less people. I think you mentioned the summit on the 21st of September. And I was just hoping that leadership from the Knox, whether it's our chairwoman, Erica Pinto, or representation from any of our First Nations here in California, First Peoples of California, if their Indigenous leadership will be present. I think that we've talked a little bit about health and a little bit about, climate, but we have not mentioned Indigenous peoples' connection to all of these waters and all of these ways and all of the past previous trespassing that we've done as a whole. And so I just would like to encourage that to happen if it's not already in motion. And I will be of any assistance where possible. Thank you.
Thank you. That is in motion, and we'll certainly reach out as we move this process along. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Andrea and Frank. Are there any other questions, or Allison, are you seeing any?
I'm not seeing any in the chat.
Or hands?
Yeah, no, I'm not seeing any.
All right. Well, thank you again to Giles and Hannah and Frank. Really appreciate the update on this issue and the discussion. With that, we'll move to the wrap up portion of our agenda and see if we have any public comments. And Allison, I'm going to look to you again to see if we have any requests to make public comments.
I'll just give people a minute here to either use the raise your hand button or put something in the chat. Looks like we have something from Rob Ball. Rob, I'm going to unmute you.
It was a question that I had for Frank. I was going to send it to Frank, so it's not for the larger group.
Oh, okay. No problem.
And maybe just as we're waiting to see if there's any comments, I've seen a bunch of questions in the Q&A box about the call for innovative concepts that Marlon talked about yesterday. It looks like there's quite a bit of interest in it. We did send the link out and some of the information out about that to the CFAC email list yesterday. But there were some questions about people were just seeing it for the first time this week and could we extend the deadline? I just had a quick consultation with Marlon and I think we are comfortable extending that deadline a week. So what we'll do is recirculate the call with an updated deadline and make sure that it does go back out to all of you on the CFAC list and everybody who's participating today. So keep an eye out for that. We really appreciate the interest. And the questions about that. The actual form itself to submit a concept is pretty short and sweet, so it shouldn't take too long to submit your ideas once you have them. But we do want to make sure that we give folks a chance to take a look at that and provide ideas to us. So keep an eye out for an updated solicitation there. All right, I'll just see one more time if there's any requests to make public comments at the end of the agenda here.
It doesn't look like we have any.
All right.
I could chime that through our freight list, we for the Department Operations Center for Emergencies and such, we get reports of shake tests and the earthquake, and it appears the epicenter of that quake was not near Stockton, it's actually near Walker, California, right by the 395 corridor, and it appears that the damage was probably light. So, but if you are going on the 395 corridor today, you may just want to take caution. It was a 5.9 earthquake. So,
wow. Thanks, Eric, for the update. Be safe out there, everyone. Well, I will wrap up the meeting here with just a few action items. As I said, we'll send that call for innovative concepts with an updated deadline back out to you in the follow-up to the meeting. In addition, we'll post all the slides and the handouts from the meeting to our CFAC webpage within the next couple of weeks, as well as a recording of the meeting on our YouTube channel. From our truck parking discussion yesterday, we're going to ask Cambridge Systematics to send a follow-up survey with some of the questions that they had about those different strategies for truck parking. So we'll appreciate if folks will send that out or fill that out when you receive that survey after the fact. And then we'll also send out the automation impacts report that Joel, Jessica, and Martha presented to us today with their contact information for any follow-ups. Those were the key action items. Anything I missed, team?
No, I think you captured everything.
Excellent. And our next meeting will be probably later in the fall. I know we switched from meeting every quarter to meeting at least twice a year. So we will be in touch soon, and hope everyone has a great summer and take some vacation. Thanks everyone. Stay cool.
Thank you.